Hello to all dear Manhwa lovers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Before we begin, I want to send a very special shout out to everyone who left their comments on the previous video. A huge hug and a special greeting to dear Roland P8, who managed to leave the first comment on the last video. You're the fastest of all. Thank you so much, and my apologies for the previous video. I didn't notice that I uploaded the wrong one. A big thanks to Link Twergler for catching that. I'll upload the correct one tomorrow. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this amazing summary. The story begins with a young man walking slowly through the streets, shoulders slumped and eyes fixed on the ground. His name is Kan Hyun, a 26-year-old man about to turn 27. For the past 3 years, he has worked at a company infamous for its exploitative practices, one of those that operates on the edge of legality. In that place, no matter how many extra hours you work, the tasks never seem to end. Kay spends night after sleepless night pushing his body beyond its limits. He increasingly feels the haunting idea that if he continues like this, he will die young. This thought torments him, refusing to leave his mind for even a second. Suddenly, murmurs and screams around him pull him out of his thoughts. Confused, he looks up and finds himself in the middle of chaos. A truck is out of control and heading straight for him. In an instant, everything happens too fast. The vehicle crashes onto the sidewalk, and the last thing Kay perceives is an overwhelming impact before everything goes dark. It seems like the end, or at least, that's what he believes. In a dreamlike state, Kay feels a strange energy coursing through his being. When he opens his eyes, he finds himself in what looks like a living painting, an unreal world where colors seem to come alive. His confusion deepens as he discovers that his body has changed. Surrounding him is a group of women dressed like nuns, or members of some religious cult. They watch him with admiration, which not only makes him uncomfortable but also seems completely inexplicable. What is this? He wonders, trying to process the scene. A hidden camera? A TV show? A bizarre streaming channel? But what puzzles him the most is the women's attire, which looks like something straight out of a strange fantasy video game. One of them, a young woman with bright blonde hair and a determined gaze, steps forward and breaks the silence. That draconian energy is unmistakable, she declares, bowing respectfully. Welcome to Sultan, the dragon's realm. Kang can barely respond, trapped in his bewilderment. The young woman addresses him as Koman Kiwan, the half-dragon, and assures him that she speaks on behalf of the Queen of Sultan, a woman named Ver. To his astonishment, she informs him that he has been granted the title of warrior commander. However, Kang is too stunned to process this. It all feels like something straight out of the light novels he used to read as a student. I'm in a fantasy world, he thinks, but strangely, he doesn't feel the excitement one might expect in such a situation. His heart remains indifferent, as if this fantasy doesn't belong to him. His thoughts are interrupted when another young woman from the group leans toward the queen and speaks in a low voice but clearly. It's true that he emanates dragon energy, but it's weak, extremely weak. It barely reaches 3% of what it should be. Moreover, that energy is concentrated in a very specific location, his chalice. The statement plunges everyone into tense silence. Kang looks around incredulously, trying to make sense of what he just heard. Could it be true that he has draconian energy hidden within his body, a power that had always been there but never manifested until now? The idea overwhelms him, and his mind begins to spin with possibilities. Perhaps on the brink of death, the power of this queen brought him to this place. Could it mean he has been reincarnated in another world? As if reading his thoughts, the queen confirms his suspicions with a calm yet intense affirmation. However, her words not only clear up his doubts, but also carry a hint of insinuation as she slowly approaches him. Kay, tired and confused, wonders if all this is nothing more than a dream. After all, he hadn't slept for 3 days, and his mind could be playing tricks on him. Reflecting on this while looking directly at the queen puts him in an absolute state of nervousness. This is definitely a dream, he thinks, his face flushing red. Although reason tells him this is absurd, his exhausted body urges him to simply go along with it. As he walks through the strange place, trying to concentrate on something else to calm himself, he can't help but notice the outfits of the women around him, each more striking than the last. His attention stops on a particular young woman whose movements and expressions seem arrogant. Before he can react, she abruptly turns to him. Her eyes gleam with disdain, and with a swift motion, she places a sword at his neck. What is going on here? The queen asks, visibly surprised. To Kang in his thoughts, it's clear that this elf hates him. This outsider wouldn't stop staring at me. The young woman responds curtly, Her name seems to be Herdell. The queen fixes her gaze on Kay, waiting for an explanation, while Herdell throws him a defiant look. "What do you have to say, outsider?" she insists, convinced her actions were justified by his sinful thoughts. Kay swallows hard, still processing what just happened. It's true he hadn't had a moment to relax in days, but the last thing he wants is to be accused of something like this. At that moment, he notices the chalice glowing faintly. The queen, concerned by the growing tension, decides to intervene before things spiral out of control. In a firm yet conciliatory tone, she asks Herdell to lower her sword. "You're threatening a half-dragon," she says, "and all his power resides in the area you just mentioned." However, Herdell frowns, refusing to believe it. "This guy?" she says disdainfully, pointing at Kay. "Impossible. He doesn't look like a half-dragon. He's just a sinful outsider who doesn't know how to behave." Without further warning, she moves directly toward Kay's chalice. The humiliation leaves Kay paralyzed. The situation surreal, almost absurd. Of all the strange things he's experienced so far, this feels particularly ridiculous. Herdell, however, doesn't stop. She steps closer, closing the distance between them, staring at him with a mix of challenge and contempt. Her proximity makes him visibly nervous, and she notices, "If my words aren't true," she murmurs in a low but sharp voice, "why are you so uneasy? And if you think they are true, then stop looking at me like that." Kay tries to avoid her gaze, but can't help thinking that, despite everything, Herdell has an incredibly beautiful face. However, her attitude irritates him. So beautiful, yet so unbearable, he thinks, annoyed but also unable to completely avert his attention. As his mind drifts, she continues hurling accusations, blaming him for anything she can think of. But the queen finally raises her hand, silencing her with a decisive gesture. "Herdell," the queen says in a softer but firm tone, "leave us alone. I need to speak with Kang." The request doesn't sound like a queen's order, but rather a friend's plea. Herdell purses her lips, seeming to want to protest, but finally sighs in resignation. Later, Kang finds himself sitting with the queen, enjoying a cup of tea in an elegant outdoor garden. The place is stunning. Vivid flowers decorate the landscape, and a gentle breeze rustles the leaves of the trees. Despite the beauty of the setting, Kay can't shake the feeling that everything is surreal. This feeling deepens when he notices the queen's servant, a woman with elegant movements, has a tail casually swaying behind her. As he tried to process this new detail, the queen interrupted his thoughts to revisit what she had mentioned back at the palace. Kay vaguely recalled that she had referred to him as a knight commander, though he still didn't fully understand what that meant. The queen explained that this was a vital role in the kingdom, reserved for someone unique, half human, half god, and half dragon. It was an ancient Sulturian tradition, a symbol of protection for the realm. Despite her explanations, Kay remained stunned and bewildered. All of this seemed far too elaborate to be real, and his exhausted mind struggled to comprehend it. However, he noticed a shift in the queen's tone when she mentioned that not everyone had welcomed his arrival. His thoughts immediately turned to Herdell. Sensing his reaction, the queen acknowledged that the young woman had her reasons for acting as she did. She explained that Herdell had been her childhood friend, and until Kay's arrival, had held the position of knight commander. For someone as proud and dedicated as her, relinquishing that role was a difficult wound to bear. Kay couldn't help but question how he could possibly be a half-dragon with only 3% draconian power. The idea seemed absurd to him, but the queen, with a calmness that unsettled him, assured him that what mattered wasn't the quantity of power but his hybrid nature, the fact that his blood contained the essence of a dragon. Despite her words, Kay couldn't grasp how this could be possible. He didn't feel anything different within himself, nothing that made him special. The queen, perceiving his skepticism, called her servant Riel to clarify the matter. Without hesitation, Riel approached Kay and knelt before him with a professional yet commanding demeanor. Before he could react or protest, she began to uncover his abdomen. Kay froze, unable to process what was happening as a blush crept up his face. When the servant revealed Kay's chalice, a tattoo appeared on it, something he hadn't even known he had. It was an intricate and mysterious symbol that seemed to emit a faint glow under the sunlight. Riel pointed to the tattoo with reverence, explaining that this seal was the manifestation of his connection to draconian power. According to her, the dragon's energy flowed from that point to the rest of the kingdom, linking him to the people of Sultan. She also mentioned that the symbol was identical to the engravings on the monoliths that protected the territory. Kay was still in shock, unable to fully process what was happening. Riel, continuing under the queen's orders, became increasingly meticulous in her work. She observed his reaction with a mix of professionalism and unusual curiosity, noting that his body responded in an atypical manner, especially the chalice, which now seemed to radiate a deep red hue due to the magical energy coursing through it. Riel detailed how the pattern of this reaction aligned with what one would expect from a being with dragon blood. The rigidity, the density, even the scent, it all matched the nature of a half-dragon. Her sharp nose, a result of her fox-beast heritage, could discern these variations clearly, and in doing so, she became convinced of the authenticity of what she was witnessing. However, one doubt lingered in Kay's mind. If not for the tattoo now visible on his body, would he still be considered ordinary? The line between the mundane and the supernatural was becoming increasingly blurred in his thoughts. Riel, noticing his confusion, continued her work without rushing. Kay, however, still couldn't fully grasp what this meant for him. The servant explained that although many had tried to falsify such signs, there was one definitive way to confirm his nature. The Dragon Saint had a unique ability to detect whether draconian energy was authentic. She advised him to rest, as the process had been arduous for both of them. Though relief seemed near, Kay remained lost in thought, questioning whether he was truly destined to be a knight commander. Nobody had asked him if he accepted the title or the responsibility that came with it, and yet everything seemed to be happening around him as if he had no real say in the matter. The queen, seeing his uncertainty, didn't press further. Instead, she showed him the room she had prepared for him, a comfortable and private place to rest. She wished him a good night, as if everything had already been decided and nothing could change it. In the solitude of his room, Kay sank into a spiral of endless thoughts. None of this made sense. The life, the imposed responsibilities, and that strange tattoo now engraved on his skin next to his chalice, a dragon, which for some reason worried him less for its meaning and more for the inconvenience it would pose when trying to use a public bathroom. The irony of the situation hit like a slap in the face. He had nearly died as a victim of overwork, and now he was being burdened with a duty far beyond his reach. In the hallway, a vigilant figure stood on guard. Herdell, assigned by the queen, fulfilled her duty with unwavering resolve, though the tension between them was palpable. Kay knew she didn't want to talk about the past, but he couldn't ignore the weight of the history they shared. Fragments of a broken tradition fluttered through his mind. The half-dragon, a symbol of stability and power that had guided the region for generations, replaced by a void after the disappearance of its predecessor. The nation had declined, neighboring regions had grown opportunistic, and now a young queen bore an overwhelming burden while everyone awaited her downfall. The responsibility was immense, and Kay knew it. He wasn't cut out for this, or so he kept telling himself. Herdell seemed more capable, more committed, more prepared to bear the shield he'd prefer to let fall. If he rejected the role, perhaps she could continue as before. But even that thought felt like self-deception. He knew the weight rested solely on him, no matter how much he wished to evade his destiny. As the hours passed, Kay decided to seek refuge in sleep, trying to ignore the tangled mess of problems that plagued him. But the night offered no respite. A soft creak broke the silence of the room, followed by the faint groan of wood under cautious footsteps. A figure approached. Half awake, Kay felt the bed shift under the weight of someone sitting on it. He opened his eyes groggily, and the dim light revealed what he already suspected. Herdell was there. Kay asked her what she was doing. She replied that if he wasn't truly a half-dragon, the position of knight commander was at risk. A man with an uncertain life arrives and turns out to be a knight commander? This was deeply disappointing for Sultan, and she wanted to confirm for herself whether he was real or a fraud. Kay was confused as she uncovered a portion of the spot where the tattoo was hidden, intending to scrutinize him. What is this? Herdell, her hands already in action, couldn't stop her mind from wandering. The question arose inevitably. Was his chalice something ordinary, human, or did it bear an unmistakable trace of a dragon? As her fingers explored cautiously, almost as if searching for a hidden answer, her determination was evident on her face. Holding him firmly, she told herself she had to confirm it. Herdell watched him critically, looking for any sign that contradicted the obvious. No matter how much she looked, what lay before her seemed as ordinary as any human. Yet her curiosity persisted. Her hands moved with calculated precision, exploring with meticulous attention. Kay, trapped under her weight and with few options, couldn't help but wonder how he had ended up in this surreal situation. A woman as beautiful as she was arrogant had him pinned down, while he struggled internally between disbelief and an uncomfortable awakening of his senses. The silence broke when Herdell noticed the change in him. A mocking smile crossed her face as she registered his reaction. Without hesitation, she called him a simple idiot, her tone a mix of disdain and something else he couldn't quite decipher. Then, resting her hand over the chalice, she let the gesture reaffirm her dominance over the moment and murmured ironically, "They say the power of a dragon resides here. We'll have to verify that." Herdell observed him with a blend of mockery and disapproval, while continuing to evaluate him. Her movements were calculated and firm. The sword in her hand was a silent threat, but her attention never wavered. Kay could only stare in a mixture of helplessness and confusion. Trapped and vulnerable, he feels his body reacting inevitably. Shame consumes him, as his mind fills with questions and confusing thoughts. Why is this happening? Why me? The heat inside him grows, and his breathing quickens. Despite his efforts, he cannot stop what seems inevitable. "I can't take this anymore. I'll have to get holy water," he thinks. Kang locks eyes with Herdell and feels a shiver run down his spine. There is a latent threat in her gaze, a cold certainty. If he refuses, he might end up dead in an instant. Desperate for a way out, any excuse to divert her attention, he stammers something about not understanding what she means by fraud. However, his mind is already forming a plan. Without thinking too much, he grabs the glass on the nightstand and deliberately smashes it against the floor. The crash echoes through the room, loud enough to alert the nearby staff. Herdell watches him with a mixture of irritation and warning. Her voice, cold as the edge of a blade, cuts through the silence. "Don't do anything stupid. Not if you plan to remain the Knight Commander." The threat is clear. If he tries again, she won't hesitate to cut off his head. Before he can respond, the door bursts open and members of the staff rush into the room, their faces tense with alarm, asking if Kang is all right. He quickly apologizes, making up a simple excuse. A broken glass, nothing more. But as he speaks, his mind screams something entirely different. "I almost died tonight because of that damn elf." When he finally dares to look up, the room is empty. The open window lets in the cold night air. Herdell is gone, vanished like a shadow. Kang sits, staring at the chaos around him, thinking that none of this, the woman or the situation, feels real. At dawn, Kang heads to the training grounds, his eyes heavy with fatigue and his muscles tense. He tries to prepare for the day, though the lack of sleep overwhelms him. The events of the previous night linger in his mind. The memories of Herdell, her dominant attitude, and the physical and mental discomfort keeping him in a state of simmering frustration. Before training begins, Herdell appears again, walking with her usual air of authority. Without preamble, she mentions rumors of a supposed sighting, though nothing has been confirmed. With a sharp gesture, she orders everyone not to speculate about it. Kang, with his usual skeptical expression, can't help but think sarcastically, "Because of this elf, I didn't sleep at all, and now she's my instructor." Meanwhile, some nearby soldiers begin murmuring as they glance at Kang. One of them asks if he's the half-dragon, mentioning that he heard something about it from the palace mages. Another responds that it's possible. Maybe another dragon knight has been born in Sultan. However, their whispers are cut short when a third soldier scolds them, warning that if Herdell hears them, she could kill them without hesitation. The fear she inspires is palpable, even among the most hardened soldiers. Kang watches the scene with disinterest, unsure whether to feel uncomfortable or amused by the fear the elf instills. Herdell turns her attention back to him, and with a mocking smile that barely hides its underlying threat, she comments that if something happens to him during training, it will be his own fault. "Even if you get stabbed by accident, no one will regret it too much," she seems to imply. Kang doesn't miss the opportunity to respond with sarcasm, thanking her for her kind words and suggesting that if she happens to drop a knife by accident, he won't feel responsible if he decides to withdraw. Her response comes swiftly, a direct blow to his stomach that leaves him on his knees, the air knocked out of his lungs. Through gritted teeth and restrained anger, Herdell reminds him that, according to official records, he's nobody, a mere nobody. If he wants to prove he's truly the half-dragon, he'll have to earn her respect. Otherwise, she makes it clear that he's free to leave, and no one will stop him. Kang, still on the ground, breathes heavily, thinking that between the humiliation and uncertainty, this new world seems determined to break him. As he remained on his knees, breathless from the blow, a fleeting memory flashed through his mind like lightning. In that instant, he saw himself, also on his knees, hearing the words of a man. "You are not alone. There are others here with you." Then another voice, firm and feminine, urged him. "You don't have to endure everything. Sometimes getting a little angry is necessary." The present yanked him back abruptly. He looked at Herdell, who continued to stare at him with that authoritative air that drove him mad. "Why won't she stop bothering me since yesterday? How much longer is she going to drag this out?" he thought, his eyes momentarily falling on her sword. Without warning, she hurled another biting remark, stating she liked his spirit, but that it was time for him to die. Kang braced himself for the inevitable. If that was his fate, he wasn't going to stand idly by. However, before he could do anything, he noticed that her sword, as she attempted to strike, had embedded itself so deeply into the ground that it couldn't be withdrawn. For a moment, everything was suspended. At that instant, Ver appeared on the scene, his face showing a mixture of confusion and anger as he took in the situation. With a firm shout, he demanded that they both stop this madness immediately. The queen, with an air of authoritative calm, remarked that if she had arrived a little later, things could have spiraled out of control. Turning to Kang, she asked if he was all right. He nodded with a brief apology, blaming himself as well for losing his temper. The queen, though forgiving, made it clear she knew who had started everything. Herdell, despite this, pointed out that Kang had also been irresponsible for letting himself get carried away. The queen spoke of Herdell with a mixture of admiration and warning. She was known as the Empress of the Continental Sword, someone whose power was unmatched. Even for a half-dragon like Kang, facing her was little less than suicide. However, the queen admitted something curious. Herdell hadn't always been like this. She used to be more mature and rational, but since Kang's arrival, something had changed in her. Herdell appeared again, her imposing presence filling the air. With an accusatory voice, she pointed out that the duel between them wasn't fair, accusing Kang of cheating. He, however, watched her silently, thinking she was acting like a child. Herdell's attitude irritated him, but there was no time to waste on unnecessary fights. The queen, observing the scene from the sidelines, watched the tension with an air of concern, but also hope. Perhaps, she thought, things would calm down once the ritual was performed. If Kang became an official knight, or even the commander, the situation might change, and Herdell would have to accept it, even if it meant spreading his wings in her presence. If what he needed was recognition, then he had to resolve what lay between them before moving forward. Relax tonight at the banquet, the queen suggested, trying to ease the tense atmosphere. Kang, however, was far from willing to wait. I want to settle this now, he replied firmly, looking directly at Herdell. Don't take this the wrong way, but this has to end here and now. I need to learn discipline, and I'll do it with her. The queen watched him, seeing the determination in his gaze, and nodded, though a small smile appeared on her face. For a half-dragon like him, character was the most important thing. Kang had that spark others lacked, something that made him stand out. Kang grabbed a nearby bottle, his mind already preparing for what he would do next. He knew that if he stayed still, all that awaited him was a sword through his body. He couldn't allow that. He approached Herdell, who was standing with her back to him in front of the soldiers. Without hesitation, he threw the contents of the bottle at her. Kang no longer had any reason to put up with her attitude or threats. The soldiers watched the scene in utter disbelief, unable to believe what had just happened. How dare he do that to Herdell? They knew that if he pushed her further, she wouldn't hesitate to kill him. Herdell, still in shock from the sudden attack, slowly turned to face Kang. Her face expressed astonishment and fury, still unable to believe someone had dared to throw something at her. Kang, without hesitation, responded, "You should clean yourself up well. Even though I'm scared to fight you, I want you to hear my terms." Herdell, her eyes blazing with fury, couldn't help but think that she would definitely finish him off. He had proposed a duel to her, but without swords. However, when the moment arrived, she found herself summoned to Kang's room, not to the combat arena. There, Kang cornered her. Herdell, bewildered, asked what was going on and what he was scheming. Kay calmly mentioned that common sense told him that facing the Empress of the Sword with a single weapon wasn't an option. He needed to be more rational. Herdell laughed incredulously. How did he intend to win without a sword? Kay, confident in his abilities, replied that he could, even with bare hands. Then, with a determined gesture, he began to retrieve the chalice from where it was stored. Herdell was in shock as she considered there was no need to fight to win. It was simply a continuation of the previous night, but this time she would recognize him as a half-dragon by the end. While holding the chalice, the young elf thought it was fine to let him try as she slowly opened the doors to her heart. Herdell told him he would have to try since elves had a mana shield. If he were an ordinary human, his chalice would be destroyed upon contact with the shield. This statement seemed to unsettle Kang, who looked somewhat surprised. He thought to himself that this wouldn't help him complete his task. Herdell, noticing his reaction, asked if he was scared. Kay, trying to maintain his bravery, responded that he didn't care if his chalice was destroyed, just as he wouldn't care if he were stabbed to death. He saw little difference. There was no way to run now. Herdell, observing his attitude, commented that he had become much more resolute and manly than she had imagined, but she knew everything depended on this moment. Kay prepared himself with determination, while Herdell couldn't help but think he would probably fail. However, to her surprise, Kay managed to penetrate the mana shield and move beyond her protective barrier. Once it was broken, the young elf couldn't help but be stunned by such a feat. Kay, for his part, mocked her, saying her shield was fragile, whether made of mana or something else. Herdell remained shocked. While she struggled to believe it was true, she couldn't comprehend how he, a half-dragon, had managed it. It was impossible. Despite Kang's own fear, he hadn't expected such a reaction. Herdell begged him to stop, her voice trembling with confusion over what was happening. But most of all because his prayers were too much for her corruption. Kang told her to be quiet, not to speak to him, while Herdell pleaded with him not to read anything from the Bible. This caused the young man to laugh. He hadn't considered the elf to be someone so religious. She demanded he stop saying nonsense and abandon his praises. Her mana shield had never been breached by any attack before. She urged him to stop, assuming he must have used some trick. Repeating her demand to let her go, Kang complied, and the young elf ended up on the ground. She asked if he had used some trick, as her legs had gone numb. It must have been a potion, but that was impossible. Where could he have obtained a potion capable of affecting the kingdom's greatest swordswoman? Kang continued, now grabbing one of the elf's garments. Though she claimed she didn't want to go on, her expression seemed to say otherwise. He believed he understood why her legs were so weak. He stripped her, helping her return to how she came into the world, and showed her a picture of a puppy. She was completely in shock over what had occurred. He let Kay keep exploring her garments, but to him she seemed like someone who believed strongly in faith. Kay wanted to try something else before beginning the mass. Since she seemed a bit skeptical, he lit some candles with a small flame, while Herdell couldn't understand what he was trying to do. She told him to be quiet. She didn't need anything to purify her soul. She needed to activate her shield as quickly as possible. Kang realized she still wouldn't give up, but if she did, it wouldn't be as fun. With that, he began the mass. Much to the elf's surprise, she couldn't comprehend why this was happening to her, but Kay, being scared, hadn't noticed that his faith was growing. Herdell may have been a renowned swordsperson, but against the power of the dragon, she could do little. Our protagonist mentioned that she didn't seem like she would surrender. She begged him to stop his prayers, but arrogantly, he asked if she truly was a high-ranking elf, she should be able to stop his praises with magic. Kang was entirely dominating the situation. He even questioned how it felt for a mere human to surpass an elf who had worked hard her whole life, or worse, for her to find herself believing in his passion for religion. She tried to say something, but she couldn't. Kang would soon become Herdell's superior, yet she continued to treat him as a subordinate. She didn't like being reprimanded, especially by a spoiled elf. For that, she deserved to be scolded. Herdell kept asking for the consecration to stop, but he had no intention of stopping reading the Bible. On the contrary, Kang wondered why she was almost having a divine revelation. The young elf couldn't understand what was happening, how her shield had failed, and how she had ended up in this situation with a human. Feeling as if all her energy was being drained from her body, Kang realized her mind was elsewhere. He asked what she was thinking, but receiving no response, he told her to focus. They would stay like this all night if necessary, until she understood what it meant to have class.